whatever.
I'm Bill Shannon. I'm president of the Chatham Railroad Museum Association, and we are managers of the Chatham Railroad Museum, which we're currently in. The building is owned by the Village of Chatham, and we have an agreement with the village to be managers and operators of the museum here. Currently, standing in what was the former freight room of the building, where freight, as in like if you ordered a stove from a Sears catalog, it'd come on the train years ago, it'd come on the train and they'd deliver it to the station and you'd come and get it. Or if you had a big box of something you were shipping to your grandmother in another state, you'd bring it here and they'd figure out what the charges would be and then they'd put it on the train and it'd get delivered. But anyway, I wanted to talk about some of what is beside me here and on the wall. First, obviously, we'll notice the lit up stained glass window. That actually is from the upper roof part of an Illinois terminal passenger car. And it was rescued when the car was scrapped, and one of our members built a wooden cabinet, put it in, and put lights in it, which appear rather bright, but nevertheless, it's a rare item. And we also have a reproduction of a speed limit sign like the Illinois Terminal Railroad would have used. 45 was speed limit for the passenger trains, and 40 was freight train speed limit. It's a reproduction, but made exactly as original. The baggage cart that everything is sitting on is not from this station originally, but it is same as what would have been here. What was done with that cart, when a passenger train came, there was large sliding doors on each side of this building. They'd open the door, pull the wagon out onto a brick platform. It ran the full length of this building. And then if there were packages, etc., on the train to be unloaded here, they load them on this cart, pulled into the building. So that's where the name baggage cart came from. That's what it was used for. And most all railroad stations had, small stations would have one, large station, like in Springfield, would have several of these. Behind it on the wall is a whole variety of tools, primarily to work on track. And some were from specific railroads, but most all railroads had a variety of this type of tools. There's one thing that's not a tool exactly, hanging here in the corner is a mail bag that up until, that is around the mid-60s, almost all the mail going from state to state or city to city was handled on railroads. And you may have seen an old movie or something where they'd throw the bag out and then there'd be an arm outside to catch a bag like this that's hanging on a framework. Anyway, that is a genuine U.S. mail bag that was donated to us. And I'll kind of generally go from one side to another here. The broom you see in the corner has a little ice scraper on the end. It was to sweep snow or dirt off the tracks, mainly snow. And an ice scraper, of course, as implied, to scrape ice if needed. And the big wrench hanging next to it, some railroads still have, they bolted the sections of track together. The rails came in 39-foot long sections, and they had holes drilled in the ends of them, and they put steel plates on each side and bolted them together. Today, like the railroad going past here, the rails are actually welded. The big wrench was to tighten those bolts to make sure the track stayed in alignment. Next to it, odd-looking hammer is to drive spikes into the wooden ties to hold the rails in place. Hammerhead on the left side, the right side was like a crowbar, you might say, to pull out loose spikes. Next, no, those aren't ice tongs. They look like it, but they were actually to pick up and carry wooden railroad ties. It'd have like 4 men that had 2 pair of those, and they'd put them on each end of the tie, and then they could move it around. The big hammer was to drive the spikes into the ties. The long thing with the forked end was a track gauge. The rails are supposed to be 4 foot 8.5 inches apart, and they could check to see that they were. Of course, you can visualize if they're too far apart, the train's going to fall off the tracks. So that was an important tool. Another signaling light used on a switch to indicate where the switch was thrown from the main line or a side track. Can't see it too well, but the tool right behind it, years ago, freight cars had what they called friction bearings. They had a bearing and then a bunch of rags inside to lubricate it. And if the oil dried up, they get what they called a hot box. Well, that tool was to open that up and see if there's enough oil in there or not. So there's just kind of a variety of a little bit of everything here. Another one of those switch lights hanging up in the window there. And moving over to the right side of the window. Yes, the big tool is the same as the crowbar you might use to pull a nail working on your house, although that's to pull a railroad spike out. And as you can see, it's quite large. The funny looking tool with the red handle is a hammer. That narrow pointed end is if you're in a narrow space, to drive a spike between rails, it would fit down in. And of course a shovel, I mean you can imagine that's to shovel whatever with. The X over the W sign, those are still in use along railroads. They're placed some distance prior to where the train tracks cross the street. X stands for crossing and W is whistle. So that's telling engineers start blowing his horn to alert people that the train's coming. Up near the corner, that's an air hose. The railroads use air pressure to operate the brakes on a train. They had hoses connecting to cars. That's one of the hoses. Now, the big item in the corner, that to me is an interesting item. It's a car mover, a railroad car mover. That top end, it's got a flange part that'll fit over the top of a railroad rail. You slide it in under the wheel on a railroad car. By pulling down with a mighty force on the end of the wooden handle, a person can actually move a railroad car. My grandfather managed a lumber yard and grain elevator, and he would get boxcars in of lumber and stuff, and he had one of those, and I can remember as a kid seeing him out there moving the car more in the position that he wanted. So, interesting thing. And below it, the big hopper, is a dustpan, just like you'd have a dustpan for your house, except that's a king size one used like to clean out a depot or something. And of course a sign below about not trespassing on the railroads, which actually it's not a good idea trespassing. You know, trains are not going to stop for you, and if you don't hear it coming, you're taking your life and limb in risk. Besides, it's illegal. Railroads own the property the tracks run on, and it's private property. More pictures on the wall here. Kind of backing up again. On the floor is a trunk, just representative of what people would have shipped stuff in years ago. Sitting on the baggage cart and a bag on it, like a traveling bag. And hanging kind of obscure back here, pardon my reach. It's a very early, one of the first Amtrak uniforms. A vest, and there's another vest, it's got stripes on it, and a shirt, which are rather interesting. As soon as we get better organized, they will be properly displayed. More stuff on this cart. This, I'm not going to turn on because it would blind you. It's a headlight off of one of the Illinois terminal passenger cars. The bulb you see in there, if you can see, it's a 500 watt light bulb, and believe me, it is bright. Also puts out a lot of heat. You can stand back 10 feet and feel the heat. Another sign off the back of an Illinois terminal passenger car with Illmo Limited, and various items here. This I think is interesting. This to open and close valves on tank cars. If they carry gasoline, you drop something in steel, you might make a spark and cause an explosion. It's made out of bronze, so it won't spark. We've got more items down below, which kind of explanatory. I think they've pretty well covered most everything that's on the cart. One thing that's interesting, these are nails, as you can see, with a number on them. And railroads, when they used wooden ties, when they install a new tie, they drive one in, and the number on the head of the nail represents the year the tie was put in. So they could go back later and see exactly how old it was, and if it was time to replace it. Which I thought was interesting. So anyway, I think I've pretty well covered. Oh, another interesting item. Not ice tongs, but clamp onto a railroad rail and pick it up. Obviously, one person won't do it. They're very heavy, so there'll be several pair of these, and several men would use them to pick up and carry a railroad rail. I believe I mentioned earlier about railroads getting a hot box, that tool to check them if they ran out of oil, the bearings. This is actually one of the bearings that they used to use on the cars. It fit on top of the axle, and you can imagine if it ran out of oil, it's going to get hot pretty quick and can catch a car on fire actually. And also, extreme cases, it could get the axle so hot it'd fall off and cause a tragic accident. So anyway, that's pretty much, I think, covering what's here. Of course, the museum's open again. I'm glad for people to come in and see it.